The first time I saw my wife smile at another man the way she used to smile at me, I was picking up her dry cleaning on a Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was supposed to be in Dallas, closing a deal that would finally let us buy the house she'd been pinning on her vision board for 2 years. But the client rescheduled last minute, and I drove home early, thinking I'd surprise her. Maybe take her to that Italian place she loved. Maybe remind her that 15 years of marriage meant something. The dry cleaner was 3 blocks from our house, Martinez Family Cleaners, the one with the faded awning and the owner who always asked about our kids even though we'd stopped trying after the 3rd miscarriage. I pulled into the parking lot and saw her car. Our car, technically. The silver Honda CR-V we'd bought together when she said minivans made her feel old. She was standing by the passenger door, laughing. Really laughing. The kind that throws your head back and crinkles your eyes. The kind she used to do with me before our conversations became grocery lists and bills and careful navigation around topics that might start fights. The man with her was younger. Mid-30s maybe, athletic build, wearing a gym shirt that looked expensive. He said something, and she touched his arm. Just a brief touch, her hand on his bicep, but it lingered half a second too long. Then she leaned in and kissed him. Not a long kiss. Not passionate. Just easy. Comfortable. The kind of kiss that said this wasn't the first time. I sat in my truck and watched my marriage end in a strip mall parking lot on a Tuesday at 2:47 p.m. I didn't confront her immediately. I know that sounds weak, but I needed to understand what I was seeing. 15 years. We'd been together since college. I'd held her hand through her father's funeral. She'd sat beside my hospital bed when the appendicitis nearly killed me. We'd renovated a kitchen together, which marriage counselors say is harder than raising children. You don't throw away 15 years on a parking lot kiss without being sure. I drove home and waited. She arrived an hour later, carrying the dry cleaning, humming something I didn't recognize. She kissed my cheek, a wife kiss, dutiful and brief, and asked about Dallas. Rescheduled, I said, watching her face. Oh, she didn't look surprised, didn't look guilty, just nodded and started pulling groceries from bags I hadn't noticed she was carrying. Well, I got stuff for tacos. You hungry? I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her shoulders and demand to know who he was, how long it had been, whether she loved him. Instead, I said, sure. Tacos sound good. We ate dinner like we'd eaten 1,000 dinners, discussing her mother's upcoming surgery, the weird noise the washing machine was making, whether we should finally replace the deck furniture. Normal. Painfully, suffocatingly normal. After she went to bed, I sat in my home office and did what I do best. I researched. Her phone was charging on the kitchen counter. I knew her passcode. We'd never hidden them from each other. Trust, we'd called it. I picked it up, hands shaking, and opened her messages. His name was Derek. The conversation history went back for months. Hundreds of messages, good morning texts, inside jokes, photos I couldn't bear to look at closely. Plans to meet. Complaints about me. He's working late again. He doesn't see me anymore. I feel invisible. There was a text from earlier that day. That was close. Thought I saw his truck for a second. My truck. She'd seen me. Or almost had. And she'd kept kissing him anyway. I scrolled further back. The messages started innocuous. He was her personal trainer at the gym she'd joined in January. Great session today. Lee, her motivation. Then compliments. Then meetings outside the gym. Coffee. Lunch. Dinner while I was traveling. Then, I think I'm falling for you. And her response. I know. Me too. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it. For 3 days, I played the role of oblivious husband. I went to work. Came home. Made small talk. Kissed her goodnight. All while a cold calculation was taking shape in my mind. See, here's what most people don't know about me. I'm a forensic accountant. I trace money for a living. Find hidden assets in divorces. Uncover fraud in business deals. I know every trick people use to hide wealth, and I know exactly how to protect mine. And I knew that Sarah had been planning something. 6 months ago, she'd asked me to sign a document. Just updating our beneficiary forms, she'd said. The insurance company needs new signatures. I'd signed it at the kitchen table, distracted by an email from a client. I remembered Sarah had seemed nervous, hovering while I scrawled my name, then quickly gathering the papers before I could read them properly. Now, sitting in my office at 2 a.m. while my cheating wife slept upstairs, I pulled out our financial records and started digging. The document I'd signed wasn't just a beneficiary update. It was an addendum to our post-nuptial agreement, one that gave her full ownership of our investment properties in the event of divorce due to my abandonment or infidelity. My infidelity, the one that didn't exist. But it would be easy to manufacture evidence of, wouldn't it? Some photos, some planted evidence. A coworker willing to lie for the right price. Then she files for divorce, claims I cheated, and walks away with everything we'd built. The investment properties alone were worth $2.3 million. I kept digging. She'd opened a separate bank account, one I wasn't on. Over the past 4 months, she'd been transferring small amounts from our joint account. 200 here, 300 there. Nothing large enough to trigger my attention, but it added up to nearly $18,000. Then I found the emails. She'd been corresponding with a divorce attorney. Not just browsing, actual consultations. The attorney had laid out a strategy: document my long work hours as emotional abandonment, establish her own financial independence, secure the properties through the addendum I'd already signed, then file. The most recent email was dated 3 days ago. Everything is in place. Just say when. My wife wasn't just cheating on me. She was systematically dismantling our marriage and positioning herself to take everything. I leaned back in my chair and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger yet, just clarity. She'd made a mistake, though. She'd assumed I was too trusting, too busy, too oblivious to notice. She'd assumed that because I worked long hours, I wasn't paying attention. But I'm a forensic accountant. Paying attention is literally my job. I spent the next week building my case. First, I installed a GPS tracker on her car, completely legal since both our names were on the title. I documented every trip to Derek's apartment. Time-stamped. Address logged. Second, I recovered deleted text messages from our phone records. The phone company keeps metadata even when users delete conversations. I submitted a legal request through my attorney, citing suspected fraud. The messages came back in a neat PDF, 4 months of affair documentation. Third, I hired a private investigator. Not for the affair. I already had enough evidence. I needed him to dig into Derek. Turns out Derek wasn't just a personal trainer. He had a history. 2 previous affairs with married clients. One resulted in a lawsuit when the husband found out Derek had been systematically encouraged his wife to liquidate assets and invest them with him. Derek was a predator, and Sarah had walked right into his trap. Or maybe she'd jumped willingly. At this point, I wasn't sure it mattered. Fourth, and most importantly, I visited my own attorney. The addendum she had you sign is problematic, he said, reviewing the document. But the good news is, it requires proof of infidelity or abandonment. Without that, it's void. And if we can prove she obtained your signature under false pretenses, which this clearly was, we can have it thrown out entirely. What about the affair? I asked. That works in your favor. Most post-nuptial agreements have morality clauses. If she's the one who violated the marriage, she forfeits the protections she tried to secure. He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. She tried to rig the game, but she didn't read the rules carefully enough. How do we proceed? Quietly. We document everything, and I mean everything. We secure your assets before she knows we're moving. We prepare the filing so when we serve her, it's airtight. Then we let her realize exactly how badly she miscalculated. The beautiful thing about being a forensic accountant is that you understand how money moves. And once you understand that, you can make it move in your favor. Over 2 weeks, I systematically restructured our finances. I transferred funds from our joint account into a separate business account for my consulting firm. Completely legal since I was the primary earner and the business was solely mine. I documented every transfer with legitimate business expenses, equipment purchases, contractor payments, operating reserves. I paid off both our cars in full, removing them from any marital asset negotiation. I contacted our investment property managers and restructured the management agreements, inserting clauses that would survive divorce proceedings and ensure I retained operational control regardless of ownership disputes. I moved my paycheck direct deposit to my business account instead of our joint account, then set up an automatic transfer for exactly half, her spousal support, calculated to the dollar based on our state's guidelines. And then I did something she'd never expect. I invited her to dinner. This is nice, Sarah said, looking around the restaurant. It was the Italian place she loved. The one I'd thought about taking her to the day I discovered everything. What's the occasion? 15 years, I said. I know our anniversary isn't until next month, but I've been thinking. I work too much. I haven't been present. I want to change that. Her face did something complicated. For just a moment, I saw guilt flicker across her features. Then it smoothed into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That's sweet, she said. I mean it. I've been taking you for granted. Us for granted. I reached across the table and took her hand. She let me, but her fingers were stiff. I want to start over. Really invest in us. Michael. She pulled her hand back. We need to talk. Here it comes, I thought. I've been unhappy, she said. For a long time. I don't think you've noticed because you're always working, always traveling, always focused on the business. I know, I said. And I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough anymore. She took a breath. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air. Around us, other diners laughed and clinked glasses, oblivious to the small detonation happening at our table. Is there someone else? I asked quietly. She had the decency to hesitate. That's not what this is about. That's not an answer. I've met someone, she admitted. But that's not why I want the divorce. I want it because we're not happy. We haven't been for years. You know that. I nodded slowly. Okay. She blinked. Okay. If you're unhappy, then yes. We should divorce. I took a sip of water, kept my voice calm. I assume you've thought about how to split things. I have, actually. She pulled out her phone, opened a notes app. She'd made a list. The investment properties should stay with me since I've been managing the tenant relationships. You can keep the business. We'll split the retirement accounts 50-50. The house, we should probably sell it and split the proceeds. And the cars, one each. I nodded like I was considering it. That seems reasonable. Have you talked to an attorney? I've consulted with one, yes. Good. That's smart. I smiled. I have too. Her expression froze. What? Well, you've been planning this for months, Sarah. I figured I should probably have legal representation too. The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. I kept my voice gentle, conversational, like we were discussing vacation plans. The addendum you had me sign 6 months ago. The separate bank account. The money transfers. Derek. She stood up so fast her chair scraped loud against the floor. People turned to look. Sit down, I said quietly. You're making a scene. She sat. Her hands were shaking. How long have you known? Long enough. I pulled a folder from beside my chair. I'd brought it specifically for this moment and slid it across the table. That's for you. Documentation of the affair. The financial transfers. The emails with your attorney. The fraudulent addendum. All of it. She opened the folder with trembling fingers. I watched her face as she flipped through pages, GPS logs, text message transcripts, photos from the private investigator. Her expression moved from shock to fear to something that might have been desperation. You've been spying on me? I've been protecting myself from fraud. I corrected. There's a difference. This is illegal. Actually, it's not. Everything in that folder was obtained legally. I own the car the GPS tracker was on. The phone records were subpoenaed through my attorney. The photos were taken in public spaces. It's all admissible. What do you want? Her voice was barely a whisper. What do I want? I leaned back. I want you to understand something, Sarah. You tried to cheat me. Not just emotionally, though that's bad enough. You tried to systematically rob me of assets I spent 15 years building. You forged a legal document. You hid money. You planned to accuse me of infidelity while you were the one having an affair. Michael, I'm not finished. My voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath. You assumed I was too stupid or too busy to notice. You assumed I'd just sign whatever you put in front of me. You bet our entire marriage that I wouldn't pay attention. Tears were running down her face now. I'm sorry. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. I took the folder back. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to accept my divorce terms. I keep the investment properties, all of them. You get the house since you love it so much, but you'll need to refinance the mortgage in your name only. We split the liquid assets 50-50, but the $18,000 you transferred gets deducted from your half. That's theft, by the way. I'm choosing not to press charges. You can't. I can. And I will. Because the alternative is I submit this evidence to a judge and you walk away with nothing. The fraudulent addendum gets thrown out. The affair voids any spousal support. And depending on how vindictive I'm feeling, I might pursue legal action for the forged signature. She was crying openly now. Other diners were definitely watching, but I didn't care anymore. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Because you tried to destroy me. I said simply. And I'm not going to fund my own destruction. Not financially. Not emotionally. Not anymore. I stood up, left cash on the table for the meal we hadn't eaten, and walked out. The divorce took 4 months to finalize. Sarah tried to fight it initially. Her attorney made noise about my aggressive asset protection and tried to paint me as controlling and vindictive. But when we entered mediation and my attorney laid out the evidence, all of it, in excruciating detail, her attorney advised her to settle. She signed the papers on a Friday afternoon in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and defeat. She wouldn't look at me, just signed her name over and over, her hand shaking, while her attorney watched with the grim expression of someone who knows their client is getting exactly what they deserve. I heard through mutual friends that she and Derek broke up 2 weeks after she moved out. Apparently, Derek wasn't interested in a relationship with someone who didn't have money. Shocking. She tried to text me once, about 3 months after everything was finalized. I know you won't believe me, but I really did love you once. I'm sorry for how things ended. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I blocked her number. Because here's what I learned. Some people will smile while they betray you. They'll kiss you goodnight while planning your destruction. They'll ask you to trust them while they're systematically dismantling everything you've built together. And the kindest thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is let them experience the consequences of their choices. I sold the house a year later and bought a condo downtown. Smaller, cleaner, with no memories embedded in the walls. I dated occasionally, nothing serious. I threw myself into work, took up running, traveled to places Sarah had never wanted to go. I ran into her once, 2 years after the divorce. She was coming out of a coffee shop downtown, wearing yoga pants and looking tired. She saw me and stopped. "Michael," she said. "Sarah." An awkward pause. Then, "How are you?" "Good," I said. And I meant it. "You?" "I'm managing." She shifted her weight. "I heard you sold the house." "Yeah." Needed a fresh start. Another pause. I could see her working up to something. "I know this doesn't matter now," she said finally, "but I really am sorry. For all of it. You didn't deserve what I did." I looked at her, really looked. This woman I'd loved for 15 years. This stranger who tried to ruin me. "You're right," I said. "It doesn't matter now." I walked past her into the coffee shop. She wouldn't look at me, just signed her name over and over, her hand shaking, while her attorney watched with the grim expression of someone who knows their client is getting exactly what they deserve. I heard through mutual friends that she and Derek broke up 2 weeks after she moved out. Apparently, Derek wasn't interested in a relationship with someone who didn't have money. Shocking. She tried to text me once, about 3 months after everything was finalized. I know you won't believe me, but I really did love you once. I'm sorry for how things ended. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I blocked her number. Because here's what I learned. Some people will smile while they betray you. They'll kiss you goodnight while planning your destruction. They'll ask you to trust them while they're systematically dismantling everything you've built together. And the kindest thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is let them experience the consequences of their choices. I sold the house a year later and bought a condo downtown. Smaller, cleaner, with no memories embedded in the walls. I dated occasionally, nothing serious. I threw myself into work, took up running, traveled to places Sarah had never wanted to go. I ran into her once, 2 years after the divorce. She was coming out of a coffee shop downtown, wearing yoga pants and looking tired. She saw me and stopped. "Michael," she said. "Sarah." An awkward pause. Then, "How are you?" "Good," I said. And I meant it. "You?" "I'm managing." She shifted her weight. "I heard you sold the house." "Yeah." Needed a fresh start. Another pause. I could see her working up to something. "I know this doesn't matter now," she said finally, "but I really am sorry. For all of it. You didn't deserve what I did." I looked at her, really looked. This woman I'd loved for 15 years. This stranger who tried to ruin me. "You're right," I said. "It doesn't matter now." I walked past her into the coffee shop.